At 10:30 on February 14th, 1929, at 2122 North Clark Street in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, 7 men stood inside the SMC Cartage Company garage waiting for a truckload of hijacked whiskey that would never arrive. Outside, witnesses saw a black Cadillac sedan pull to the curb, and 5 men stepped out, 2 in police uniforms. What happened next took less than 90 seconds and changed how America understood organized crime. The men dressed as police officers walked through the front door first. The 7 men inside recognized the routine. Federal agents and Chicago cops raided speakeasies and bootleg operations daily. They lined up against the north wall, hands raised, facing the bricks. Nobody ran. Nobody reached for weapons. The 2 uniformed officers held shotguns. The 3 men in civilian clothes followed, carrying Thompson submachine guns. One witness across the street heard a voice shout something. Then the Thompsons opened. The muzzle velocity was 920 feet per second, rate of fire 600 rounds per minute. The shooters emptied their drum magazines into the backs and heads of 7 men pressed against brick at point-blank range. The noise sounded like firecrackers, one neighbor later told police. It lasted 7 seconds. When the shooting stopped, the uniformed men marched the 3 in civilian clothes out at gunpoint, as if making arrests. The Cadillac drove north on Clark, turned west, disappeared. Inside the garage, 6 men lay dead in spreading pools. Frank Gussenberg, age 36, took 14 rounds to the chest, back, and arms. He lived for 90 minutes. At Alexian Brothers Hospital, detectives asked who shot him. Gussenberg said, "Nobody shot me." He died at 13:30. Peter Gussenberg, Frank's brother, age 40, took 8 rounds. Adam Hayer, age 40, accountant, took 9 rounds. Albert Kashlek, age 29, took 11 rounds. John May, age 35, mechanic hired that morning to work on a truck, took 8 rounds. Albert Weinshank, age 36, took 7 rounds. Reinhard Schwimmer, age 29, optometrist who hung around the gang for the thrill, took 6 rounds. 7 men killed. 0 arrests that day. 0 convictions ever. Because of that, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre became the most famous gangland execution in American history, a mark of savagery that shocked even a nation that had grown used to Prohibition violence. But the massacre was not spontaneous rage or improvised revenge. It was a culmination of a 10-year gang war over the right to sell illegal alcohol in Chicago, a war fought between 2 organizations that started as allies, fractured over territory and pride, and escalated through assassination, ambush, and bombing until one side decided to erase the other in a single morning. The roots of the massacre reach back to 1919, to a constitutional amendment, to the collision of Italian and Irish immigrant gangs, to the struggle for control over a market worth $100 million a year in a single city. This is the story of what happened before the bricks turned red on North Clark Street. This is how Chicago's beer wars built the road to February 14th, 1929. On January 16th, 1920, the Volstead Act took effect, enforcing the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The law banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors across the entire country. The stated goal was moral reform, the reduction of crime, the protection of families. The actual result was the opposite. Overnight, an industry worth billions vanished from the legal economy and reappeared in the underworld. Breweries, distilleries, saloons, all shut their doors or went underground. Demand for alcohol did not drop. Supply became illegal. Price went up. Profit exploded. Organized crime, which had controlled gambling, prostitution, and extortion in most American cities, now controlled the most popular product in the country. In Chicago, a city of 3 million people with a reputation for corruption, a culture of saloons, and a thirst that defied any law, Prohibition created a criminal gold rush. Before Prohibition, Chicago's underworld was organized by neighborhood, ethnicity, and racket. Italian crime families controlled parts of the South Side and Near West Side. Irish gangs ran sections of the North Side. Smaller Polish, Jewish, and Greek syndicates held their own blocks. Violence was localized, personal, settled with fists or single shots in alleyways. The fortunes were modest. Then Prohibition arrived, and the economics changed. A barrel of beer cost $4 to produce and sold for $55 to a speakeasy. A case of Canadian whiskey bought for $15 across the border in Detroit resold in Chicago for $90. A single truckload delivered in one night could net $5,000 profit. Multiply that by hundreds of trucks, dozens of breweries, thousands of speakeasies, and the annual take in Chicago alone approached $100 million. That kind of money required organization, muscle, political protection, and ruthless enforcement of territory. Two men understood this immediately. Johnny Torrio, age 38 in 1920, was a strategic architect. He was born in Italy, raised in New York, sent to Chicago in 1909 by his uncle, Big Jim Colosimo, who ran the city's vice empire from the South Side. Torrio was quiet, calculating, methodical. He did not drink, did not chase women, did not flash wealth. He read newspapers, studied competitors, built alliances with politicians and judges. When Prohibition passed, Torrio saw the future. He urged Colosimo to pivot from prostitution to bootlegging. Colosimo refused. He was making enough money, he said. He did not want the heat. On May 11th, 1920, Colosimo was shot and killed inside his own cafe on South Wabash Avenue. The shooter was never identified. Torrio inherited the empire. Torrio's first move was to bring talent. He called his protege in New York, Alphonse Capone, age 21, a former bouncer and enforcer with a scar on his left cheek and a reputation for violence tempered by intelligence. Capone arrived in Chicago in 1920 and became Torrio's lieutenant, enforcer, and eventual heir. Together, they built the Chicago Outfit, a centralized syndicate that controlled bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution across the South Side and into the western suburbs. They bought breweries, truck fleets, warehouses. They paid off police captains, ward bosses, mayors. They employed hundreds of men, drivers, guards, accountants, gunmen. By 1923, the outfit was generating $10 million a year in profit. Torrio and Capone were millionaires. But the outfit did not control the entire city. The North Side belonged to another gang, led by a florist. Charles Dean O'Banion, age 32 in 1924, was the public face of Chicago's North Side Gang, a coalition of Irish, Polish, and some Jewish criminals who controlled bootlegging, robbery, and labor racketeering north of the Chicago River. O'Banion ran a flower shop on North State Street, across from Holy Name Cathedral. He arranged bouquets during the day and ordered killings at night. He was charming, witty, devout Catholic, attended Mass regularly, donated to the church. He was also a career criminal who started as a singing waiter in Govern's Saloon, moved into safecracking, and by Prohibition was hijacking Torrio's beer trucks and muscling into his territory. O'Banion despised Italians, mocked them to their faces, refused to follow the outfit's rules. He had his own breweries, his own speakeasies, his own police protection on the North Side. He did not need Torrio's permission. Torrio, the strategist, preferred negotiation to bloodshed. He proposed a division of the city. The outfit controlled the South Side and West Side. The North Siders controlled the North Side, and both organizations could operate in the loop. Profits would be shared on joint ventures. Disputes would be settled by sit-down, not gunfire. It was a business arrangement, a corporate compromise. For a while, it held. The two gangs coexisted, made money, avoided war. Torrio and O'Banion even partnered on a few deals, splitting profits on shared breweries and speakeasies that operated on the border zones. Then O'Banion broke the deal. In May 1924, O'Banion approached Torrio with an offer. He wanted to sell his share in the Zebun Brewery, a large operation on the north side that both gangs co-owned. O'Banion said he was tired, wanted to retire, would sell his half for $500,000. Torrio agreed. On May 19, 1924, Torrio arrived at the brewery with cash to finalize the deal. Federal Prohibition agents raided the building 20 minutes later. Torrio was arrested on site. O'Banion, who had tipped off the feds, had already left. The arrest was Torrio's second Prohibition offense, which carried a mandatory 9-month jail sentence. He realized O'Banion had set him up, sold him a raid, taken his money, and humiliated him in front of the entire underworld. Torrio, the diplomat, decided O'Banion had to die. On November 10th, 1924, at 12 o'clock, 3 men walk into O'Banion's flower shop on North State Street. O'Banion was in the back, cutting stems for a funeral arrangement. One of the men shook O'Banion's hand, a traditional greeting. The other 2 pulled guns and shot O'Banion 6 times in the chest, throat, and face. He died instantly. The killers walked out, climbed into a car, drove away. Witnesses described the men as Italian. Police suspected Torrio and Capone but had no evidence. The murder was never solved. Because of that, the truce died with O'Banion. The North Side Gang, now led by Jaime Weiss, age 28, and George Bugs Moran, age 32, swore revenge. They would not negotiate with the outfit. They would kill every Italian they could reach until Torrio and Capone were dead. The beer wars began in earnest. On January 12, 1925, Torrio returned home to his apartment at 7011 South Clyde Avenue on the south side. He and his wife had been shopping. At 16:10, as Torrio stepped out of his car carrying packages, a black sedan pulled alongside. 2 men jumped out with shotguns and pistols. The first blast hit Torrio in the jaw, arm, and chest. He fell. The second man stood over him and fired 3 more rounds into his legs and groin. Torrio's wife screamed. The shooters ran back to the sedan and drove off. Torrio survived. He spent weeks in the hospital under guard. When he recovered, he made a decision. He was done. He had been shot, humiliated, arrested. The war was escalating. He did not want to die over beer. In February 1925, Torrio announced his retirement. He handed control of the entire Chicago outfit to Al Capone, age 26. Torrio moved to Italy, invested his millions, and lived until 1957. He was one of the few gang leaders of the era to die of old age. Al Capone, now the boss, was the opposite of Torrio in temperament. Where Torrio was cautious and quiet, Capone was loud, flashy, brutal. He wore tailored suits, drove armored Cadillacs, held court in the Lexington Hotel. He loved publicity, gave interviews, called himself a businessman providing a service the public demanded. He also loved violence. He carried a gun, beat men with baseball bats, ordered executions without hesitation. He had survived the streets of Brooklyn, worked for Frankie Yale, climbed the ranks in Chicago. Now he commanded an organization of 700 men and controlled an empire worth millions. He would defend it with everything he had. The North Siders tested him immediately. On September 20th, 1926, at 13:15, Jaime Weiss led a convoy of cars past a Hawthorne Inn in Cicero, the outfit's headquarters just outside Chicago city limits. The cars slowed as they approached the hotel. Gunmen leaned out of the windows with Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. They opened fire on the hotel facade, shattering every window, pocking the walls with over 1,000 rounds. Capone was inside, eating lunch with bodyguards. He dove to the floor. The shooting lasted 30 seconds. Nobody was killed. The Hawthorne Inn looked like a war zone. Capone, shaken but alive, understood the message. Weiss wanted him dead, and he would come again. Capone struck back. On October 11th, 1926, at 4 p.m., Jaime Weiss and 3 associates walked toward the entrance of the Holy Name Cathedral Rectory on North State Street, directly across from O'Banion's old flower shop. Weiss was attending a meeting. As the men reached the sidewalk, gunners hidden in a second-floor apartment across the street opened fire with Thompson submachine guns. Weiss took 10 rounds to the chest and head. He died on the pavement. His bodyguard, Patrick Murray, age 29, took 6 rounds and died beside him. 2 others were wounded. The shooters climbed down a back staircase and vanished. Police found the motor guns abandoned in the apartment. No arrests were made. Capone, questioned by police, said he was in Cicero at the time, surrounded by witnesses. He expressed regret at the death of a fellow businessman. Because of that, the North Side Gang lost its second leader in less than 2 years. George Bugs Moran, age 33, took command. Moran was tougher, meaner, less strategic than O'Banion or Weiss. He was born in Minnesota, raised in Chicago's slums, arrested 26 times by age 21 for robbery, assault, and burglary. He was a brawler and a thief, loyal to his crew, contemptuous of Capone, whom he called a beast. Moran vowed to continue the war until every Italian in the outfit was buried. He hijacked Capone's trucks, bombed his speakeasies, shot his drivers. Capone responded in kind. Between 1926 and 1929, over 200 men were killed in gang-related violence in Chicago. Bombs destroyed restaurants, breweries, and homes. Ambushes happened in daylight on busy streets. The police, many of whom were on gang payrolls, made few arrests. The newspapers called it the Beer Wars. Tourists called it the Chicago Way. By late 1928, Capone decided the war had to end. Moran and the North Side gang were costing him money, men, and reputation. Every hijacked truck, every bombed brewery, every dead outfit soldier was a loss Capone could not afford. He was making millions, but he was spending millions on guards, guns, and bribes to keep the operation running. He wanted Moran dead, but Moran was careful. He moved constantly, varied his routines, surrounded himself with armed men. Capone could not get close. So Capone decided to use bait. In January 1929, Capone's people put out word on the street that a shipment of high-quality Canadian whiskey, hijacked from a Detroit Purple gang truck, was available for sale at a discount. The seller was unknown, but the price was good, the product verified. Moran, always looking to restock his speakeasies, agreed to buy. The meeting was set for the morning of February 14th, 1929, at the SMC Cartage Company garage on North Clark Street, a North Side gang front used for storing trucks and liquor. Moran and his top men would inspect the goods, finalize the deal, take delivery. It was routine. It was a trap. Capone spent February in Florida. He made sure dozens of people saw him at his estate in Miami Beach. He played golf, hosted parties, gave interviews. He established an alibi that would hold under scrutiny. In Chicago, the plan moved forward. Jack McGurn, age 26, Capone's chief enforcer and a machine gun specialist, organized a hit. He recruited the shooters, most likely a mix of outfit gunmen and imported talent from outside Chicago. He rented the apartment across from the garage to scout the location. He obtained police uniforms and a black Cadillac sedan that resembled an unmarked police car. The plan was elegant. Pose as cops raiding the garage. Get the Northsiders to line up against the wall. Execute them all. Walk out as if making arrests. By the time real cops arrived, the shooters would be gone, the North Side gang decapitated, and Capone's alibi bulletproof. On the morning of February 14th, 7 men gathered inside 2122 North Clark Street. Frank Gussenberg and his brother Peter, both enforcers. Adam Hare, the gang's bookkeeper and business manager. Albert Kashlek, a safecracker. Albert Weinshank, who ran speakeasies. John May, a mechanic hired that day to fix a truck. Reinhard Schwimmer, an optometrist who liked to associate with gangsters and happened to be there. They waited for Moran, who was running late. At 10:30, the black Cadillac pulled up. The 5 men in police uniforms and plainclothes entered. The 7 men inside assumed it was a raid. They lined up, hands raised. The Thompsons opened. In 7 seconds, the shooting was over. The killers walked out, staged a fake arrest, drove away. A neighbor, drawn by the noise, peered through the garage window, saw the bodies, and called police. The real cops arrived at 10:50. One of the officers, Thomas Loftus, walked inside, saw the carnage, and vomited. The scene was later described in the Chicago Tribune. The garage was a slaughterhouse. The wall was riddled with bullet holes. Blood pooled on the concrete. Shell casings littered the floor. Frank Gussenberg, still alive, was taken to Alexian Brothers Hospital. Detectives asked who did it. Gussenberg, following the code, refused to talk. He died 90 minutes after arrival. The 6 others were pronounced dead at the scene. Autopsies counted a total of 70 bullet wounds across 7 bodies. The Cook County coroner estimated the shooters fired between 80 and 100 rounds in less than 10 seconds. The Thompsons used were .45 caliber, drum-fed, capable of 600 rounds per minute. The forensic report noted that several victims had been shot in the back of the head after they had already fallen, execution style, to ensure no survivors. George Bugs Moran escaped because he was late. He arrived on North Clark Street at 10:35, so the black Cadillac and men in police uniforms entering the garage. He assumed it was a genuine police raid and turned around, walking away. He later told a reporter, "Only Capone kills like that." Moran survived the massacre but never recovered his power. The North Side Gang, leaderless and decimated, fractured. Moran lived until 1957, dying in prison of lung cancer. Broke and forgotten. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre did what Capone intended. It destroyed the North Side Gang's ability to fight. But it also brought unwanted attention. The brutality shocked the nation. Newspapers across the country ran front-page stories with photos of the bodies, the bullet-riddled wall, the blood. Editorials demanded action. The federal government, which had largely ignored Chicago's gang wars as a local problem, decided to investigate. President Herbert Hoover, in office less than a year, called Capone a threat to law and order and assigned the Bureau of Prohibition and the Internal Revenue Service to bring him down. The massacre, intended to end the war, became the beginning of Capone's downfall. Because of that, the FBI and IRS began building a case against Capone. They could not prove he ordered the massacre. No witnesses came forward. No shooters were ever identified. Jack McGurn had a documented alibi. He was in a hotel room with his girlfriend, Louise Rolfe, who testified they were together all morning. The girlfriend became known as the Blonde Alibi. The case went cold, but federal investigators shifted focus. If they could not get Capone for murder, they would get him for taxes. Capone made millions but never filed a return. He claimed no income, owned no property in his name, kept no records. The IRS agent assigned to the case, Elmer Irie, began tracing cash flows, interviewing bookkeepers, subpoenaing bank records. It took 2 years, but Irie built a case. On June 5, 1931, Al Capone was indicted on 22 counts of federal income tax evasion. The trial began in October. The evidence was financial, ledgers, deposits, expenditures, testimony from insiders who turned informant. Capone's lawyers argued he made no taxable income, that he was merely a gambler and a salesman. The jury did not believe it. On October 17, 1931, Capone was convicted on 5 counts. On October 24th, Judge James Wilkerson sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for tax evasion at the time. Capone was sent to Atlanta, then transferred to Alcatraz in 1934. He was released in 1939, suffering from advanced syphilis. He died in 1947 at age 48, his mind destroyed, his empire dismantled. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre remains unsolved. In the 95 years since, no one has been charged. Jack McGurn was killed in 1936 in a Chicago bowling alley, shot 7 times in a revenge killing. A Valentine's Day card was left on his body. Bugs Moran died in prison in 1957. Most of the suspected shooters were killed in gang violence or died in obscurity. The garage at 2122 North Clark Street was demolished in 1967. The brick wall where the 7 men died was dismantled, the bricks numbered and sold. Some ended up in museums. Others were bought by collectors. A few are displayed at the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. The site is now a parking lot. A plaque marks the location. Tourists visit. Take photos. Stand where men bled out on a cold morning 95 years ago. What the massacre revealed was this. Prohibition created a market so profitable that men would kill without hesitation to control it. The war between Capone and Moran was not about ideology or ethnicity. It was about money. $100 million a year in a single city. The 18th Amendment, designed to reduce crime, produced the opposite. It empowered organized crime, militarized gangs, corrupted police and politicians, and turned American streets into war zones. Chicago was the most visible battleground, but the same dynamics played out in New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, Kansas City. Gangsters became millionaires. Judges took bribes. Cops looked the other way. The rule of law collapsed. Prohibition lasted until December 5, 1933, when the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th. The legal alcohol market returned. Gangsters shifted to gambling, narcotics, extortion. Some went legitimate. Others went to prison or died violently. But the structure they built, the methods they refined, the networks they established, all survived. The American Mafia as an institution was forged during Prohibition. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was its most brutal advertisement. Because of that, February 14th, 1929, marks a hinge in American crime history. Before that date, gangsters were local thugs, small-time operators. After that date, they were national figures, celebrities, symbols of defiance and violence. The massacre made Al Capone the most famous criminal in the world. It made the Thompson submachine gun an icon of the era. It made Chicago synonymous with gangsters. And it made clear that the government had lost control of entire cities to men who ruled by fear, bribery, and bullets. The 7 men killed that morning were criminals. They sold illegal alcohol, hijacked trucks, extorted businesses. They were not innocents. But they died because they stood between Al Capone and total control of Chicago's underworld. They died because Prohibition made bootlegging more profitable than any legitimate business. They died because the violence of the beer wars had escalated to the point where annihilation, not negotiation, was the only option Capone saw. And they died because in Chicago in 1929, justice was for sale, and murder was just another business expense. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre did not end gang violence in Chicago. It did not stop bootlegging. It did not scare Capone into retirement. What it did was expose the scale of lawlessness that Prohibition had unleashed. It forced the federal government to act. It made the public, even those who enjoyed speakeasies and bootleg gin, confront the cost of their defiance of the law. 7 men dead on a garage floor, their blood soaking into concrete, became the image that defined an era. And it all started 10 years earlier, with a constitutional amendment that banned alcohol and 2 gangs that went to war over the right to sell it.